They say the silence of a battlefield after the last gunshot is the loudest sound in the universe. But that day, when humanity stopped speaking, the entire galaxy froze because the silence wasn't after a battle. It was before one. No warning, no speeches, no last attempts at diplomacy. Just absence. At first, people thought it was a glitch in the networks. Maybe Earth's communication grid had gone offline. But then the human embassies across the stars closed their doors. The scouts pulled back from the outer colonies. Fleet transmissions went dark. Even the human-created AIs, always so chatty, fell mute. It wasn't a war cry. It was something worse. It was intentional. For centuries, humanity had been noisy neighbors in the stars. Loud, curious, always eager to talk, argue, trade, or fight if it came to that. They explored far faster than any other known species had before them. Built faster, adapted quicker, bargained harder. But they also forgave maybe a bit too often. They let some skirmishes slide. They absorbed betrayals with stern words and tighter borders. They found peace over and over again, even when other species tried to test the limits of human patience. So when humanity stopped talking altogether, the galaxy noticed. Some species hoped it meant Earth was finally collapsing under the weight of its politics. Others feared it was the calm before a storm. A few short-sighted empires even whispered, "Now's the time." They should have known better. The United Orion Commune, breathing down from its ivory towers high in the galactic core, was among the first to press forward. As the most diplomatically dense and self-assured civilization in the known sectors, they believed they could crack whatever new game the humans were playing. They fired off encrypted messages laced with automated translators, diplomacy packets, and net viruses disguised as gifts. Humanity didn't even blink. A week passed. Then, too, supply routes went unpatrolled, merchant ships stopped responding to hails, and human territories began to show a strange kind of order. Perfect timing. No delays, no errors, no explanations. It was as if the humans had cut off the galaxy, yet knew exactly what each system still needed and sent it without a single word. Governments across the stars met in hushed conference chambers. Security councils declared amber alerts. Spies were dispatched. None came back. In the dark, something was moving. Something bigger than war. Something deeper than strategy. Humanity wasn't hiding. They were preparing. Something. The first real fear came when a minor outpost on the border of the Algorai Syndicate reported a human fleet passing through without warning, without greetings, without weapons drawn. Not a shot was fired, but every ship in that fleet carried a strange mark on its hull, a black circle with no emblem, no faction, no identification. The Syndicate scrambled to make contact. Not one human officer responded. Not even a glance. Not even a nod over the bridge cam. They just looked forward, silent as void, expressionless and cold. After the encounter, Algorai media named them Quiet Armada. The name caught fire. Soon, rumors exploded across the networks. Human fleets were on the move, but not to conquer. Not yet. They passed systems they could have taken easily. They held position just along the borders of old treaties. They sat in the shadows of planets where scars of past wars still lingered, watching, waiting. Some believed they were judging. A team of scholars on the planet Nera 4 compared the sudden silence to ancient human myth stories of punishment through withdrawal. Where once they had given warnings, second chances, even last-minute negotiations, now humanity offered nothing but absence. It was a silence that weighed more heavily than declarations. Allies began to worry. Enemies began to pray, and the empires? Every one of them held their breath. In a cold, blue-lit observation deck deep within the orbiting house of Accord, the heart of interstellar diplomacy, a meeting was being held behind sealed doors. The best cryptographers, xenologists, war historians, and diplomats had been called in. They pored through fragments, old comms, forgotten transcripts, filtered emotion logs, trying to find any clue that could explain the silence. One of the younger analysts, barely out of academy, asked the question no one wanted to hear out loud: what if humanity Stop talking because they've already decided what they're going to do. The room fell deathly quiet. A veteran diplomat, old enough to have stood through the Rigel incursion, stared blankly out the window, nerves showing through her clenched jaw. "They don't bluff," she said, almost a whisper. "When humans say they're done, they are done. And when they don't say anything at all?" No one needed the rest of that sentence. Meanwhile, in a quiet hangar on a neutral moon, an independent salvage crew stumbled across something haunting. A derelict human ship, freshly abandoned, its systems still humming softly. No crew inside. No logs. No distress signals. But in the captain's chair sat a single item, a folded letter, not a datapad, not a screen. A letter. Handwritten, sealed, and addressed to every empire that ever drew blood from Earth. The crew didn't open it. None of them could. The message was encrypted in what analysts later identified as Class Black Cognition Script, a level of encryption designed only to be decrypted by direct human neural resonance, likely a high-ranking officer or commander, but at the bottom of the envelope, beneath layers of indecipherable code, was one line written in plain universal script: "You were warned." Fear, real fear? Suddenly, it didn't matter how strong an empire's fleet was. No artificial intelligence, no matter how advanced, could predict what a silent humanity was planning. No algorithm could interpret the silence. No probe could unravel intent from a single, unified action, humanity stepping back. And saying nothing, the aliens wanted to believe this would pass. That maybe Earth was simply regrouping. Yet deep inside, they knew. Something had been broken. Something had shifted. And now, the very species once known for diplomacy, music, stories, and relentless negotiation had closed themselves off. A people once known for finding peace were preparing for something else. Even the stars seemed to dim around them, dot in the shadows of a forgotten mining colony. Far from the inner sectors, a small boy barely past toddler age looked up at the sky with tired eyes. He clutched an old, torn fabric, stained with the faded symbol of the human coalition. His family hadn't heard from Earth in weeks. His mother whispered, "They're coming." "Who?" the child asked. "The ones who stopped talking." That night, across half the galaxy, sensors triggered all at once. Ships launched. Engines ignited. Systems blacked out. The quiet armada. Move. No message. No peace offering. Just silence, and in the core of the darkness humanity watched. Waiting. Calculating. Deciding who would speak first, because when humanity finally speaks again, everyone will listen. All fall. And this time there will be no second warning. Long before the silence, before the ships moved like shadows across the stars, humanity had been the loudest voice in the galaxy. Not just because they had strong opinions, or a taste for chaos, which they did, but because they cared about everything. Every injustice. Every opportunity. Every discovery. They listened. They asked. They argued. They laughed. Sometimes too much. Sometimes when they shouldn't, but they made sure their voice was always heard. For better or worse. The Federation of Outer Species once joked that if humans entered a room, 3 things would happen. They'd rearrange the furniture, tell you how to use it better, and ask you why the walls were painted that color in the first place. And still, people loved them for it. Or feared them for exactly the same reason. But as colonies expanded and alliances deepened, something shifted. The warmth they once offered the stars slowly cooled. Empires lied to them. Treaties were broken. There were ambushes. Silent betrayals in the shadows of trade deals. Border skirmishes that left scars on stations full of innocent people. At each turn, humanity gave one more warning. One more signature on a peace accord. One more cleverly worded speech. Until finally, they did single quotes d. No one noticed the exact moment it happened. It wasn't a speech or an announcement. It was quieter than that. Just a transmission that never arrived. A meeting that never took place. A reply that never came. The stars waited for the usual cascade of words and righteous fury, but got nothing. The silence began as a whisper. Then it became a warning, back home, near the Sol system, Earth remained calm. News wasn't shut down. It was selective. Reports were brief, clean, focused, no fear-mongering. Most of the population didn't even know the full scale of what was happening beyond the jump gates. But the military knew. The diplomats knew. So did the frontier colonies that had watched neighbors burn while help came too late. One such colony was Kepler V. It had once been known for its green plains, its music festivals, and schools that taught alien languages to 5-year-olds. But now half of it lay buried beneath ash and ice. After an unprovoked raid by a neighboring system acting under sovereign expansion rights, over 30,000 civilians were gone. Kepler didn't get justice. It got silence. Admiral Turin, one of the last remaining figures on the Earth Council with clearance for deep code classified intelligence, stood alone in a chamber deep beneath the Pacific Shelf, a place no alien had ever been allowed to step foot. No cameras broadcast from here. No records were ever publicly logged. Just a round table and whispers of histories that never made it into textbooks. He wasn't old by military standards. Maybe early 50s, but there were years in his eyes. The kind that came not from war but choices. Heavy ones. Nation-ending ones. This silence, it hadn't come from weakness. It was a lever they had all agreed to pull if pushed too far. Turin hadn't pulled it alone. But he might be the only one left bearing the burden of what followed. He tapped the screen embedded in the table. Old videos flickered to life. Grainy footage. Attacks that had been laughed away in the news. Treaties that were signed, then tossed away the moment human fleets were recalled. Clip after clip replayed the galaxy's false smiles and underhanded slaps. The most painful was the Kepler transmission, static, then a child's voice, shaky and cutting through the noise, saying, "They're breaking the sky." Then nothing. Turin didn't shed tears. He didn't have any left, but he whispered something under his breath. The same thing he always did before signing classified orders. We gave them every chance. Across the stars, people started adding up the clues. In the Orion Concourse, one of the galaxy's largest neutral trade hubs, merchants and traders noticed something strange first. Humans weren't just quiet, they were vanishing. Not dead, not detained, just gone. Security officers checked logs. Hundreds of ships gone dark within a span of days. Delegates disappeared from embassies overnight. A whole sector of human technocrats in the engineering guild left behind only maintenance drones and encrypted files no one could crack. Every system that ever traded with Earth suddenly found its back doors sealed. Shared supply chains twisted. Dependencies knotted. The kind of disruption that only happens when someone had been preparing for years, not months. A few daring speculators tried to exploit the vacuum anything for a profit. But when a resource fleet from the Valoran Combine tried to redistribute an abandoned human terraforming station on Hades 9, they triggered something no one expected. A message played automatically on arrival. No voice. No face, just a black circle on screen. Then coordinates. 16 seconds later, the station self-destructed, vaporizing the Combine vessel in the process with surgical precision. Not a scrap left drifting in space. Every system on that frequency received the playback. It was a warning, one they couldn't answer. As fear deepened, conspiracies took over the comm channels. Some believed the silence was run by an underground AI syndicate within Earth Command, mimicking humanity's voice through silence and action. Others were sure it was purely psychological warfare. Old friends of humans, like the pacifist Lauren species, begged for contact, publicly, desperately, but there was nothing, not even hate, and that's what scared. The most. It wasn't vengeance. It was cold. Strategic. Controlled. Like they had all been put on hold, while humanity decided whether or not they were still worth keeping in the conversation. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the Andromeda Gate, the largest jump ring near human territory, an event occurred that didn't make it into official galactic records. A small research vessel, registered under a false identity and carrying a crew of 10, tried to hack the ring's controls. Standard espionage. The kind that happened every day in a galaxy full of rival ambitions. But this time, when they tried to breach the system, a beacon activated. Not loud. Not violent. Just a pulse. One by one, their systems shut down, then the lights dimmed. All 10 crew experienced the same phenomenon. No pain, no violence. But each of them heard a single word inside their mind. Different languages. The same meaning, asterisk, asterisk, listen. Asterisk, asterisk, when recovered, they were silent too, non-responsive, eyes awake but minds elsewhere. Some believed they'd been brainwashed. Others claimed it was just trauma. But reports leaked eventually, especially the part where every single crew member, in private moments, would write the same symbol. Sometimes without even realizing they were doing it, that black circle, again and again. What no one realized, not yet, was that Earth wasn't just retreating. Humanity was calculating something bigger. And in the solar heart of Earth, where the old bones of nations still shaped the geography, something was being built, a series of massive structures, stretching across skies, oceans, even beneath tectonic layers. Not megacities. Not weapons. Something much more complicated. Files referred to it as the resonance array, though no one outside the highest black clearance levels understood what it did. The scoffs of alien analysts supposed it was a panic defense system. Others guessed it was simply theater, Earth's way of making themselves seem scarier. They were all wrong. Every empire debated what to do next. Some wanted to launch a show of power. Others pleaded for restraint. But no one acted, because to make a move now was to blink. And that black circle still pulsed, like a heartbeat across every silent system humanity once touched. Not rage, not grief, not threat, just inevitability. And somewhere, in a hidden corridor lined with war maps and star charts older than most civilizations, a message draft sat unsent on an encrypted console. No signature, no title. Just words. Underscore, they mistook our silence for surrender. They forgot we don't shout when we prepare. We focus. Underscore, across the galaxy. Silence deepened. But it wasn't made of emptiness. It was full of calculation, and the quiet. Armada had not yet stopped moving. On the outer edge of a minor trade corridor, a listening station orbiting an old blue giant picked up something strange. Not an attack, not a breach. Just a low pulse, like a heartbeat echoing across space, hitting every sensor at once. No message. No signature. No traceable source. But it was undeniably human. The station's analysts scrambled, trying to triangulate the pulse's origin. But by the time they even locked onto the direction, it was gone, removed, deleted, as if it had only existed long enough to be noticed, just long enough to remind anyone still watching that humanity was still out there. And they were not done. In the Galactic Center. Within the mirrored halls of the Varellan Accord's High Council chamber, blades of light danced across the floor. A projected map of what used to be human trade space now marked as neutral or under review. The Varellans had been humanity's longest-standing diplomatic partners until last cycle, when the Accord chose to abandon a human mining colony during a coordinated pirate siege, citing non-interference protocols. Over 17% of the colony died before survivors managed to activate their emergency shield array. The rescue fleet arrived 2 weeks later. Varellan officials never publicly apologized. Now, as tensions wrapped like wire through every corridor of the Accord's high courts, whispers of regret simmered beneath the surface. Not spoken aloud, of course. The Accord was too proud for that. But their silence ever since humanity's withdrawal wasn't strength, it was fear. Every ambassador knew it. The humans hadn't retaliated. They hadn't cut off alliance agreements or declared war. They just doffed, vanished. And their sudden silence said something no war declaration ever could. Asterisk, we're done talking. Now you're the fragile ones. Asterisk, on the inner rim of Sector Delta 6. A young human named Elan docked an old dropship in a scrapyard orbiting the moon of Varos. Elan wasn't part of the fleet. He wasn't a diplomat or spy or anything important. At least not anymore. Once a courier for an old Earth-aligned smuggling ring, now all he carried were scraps of forgotten tech, broken systems, half-functioning drones. He didn't care what humanity was planning. Earth had gone quiet, and Elan, like many others still stuck between star systems, had been left behind in the noise. But that day, buried beneath a wrecked cruiser overlooked by almost every scavenger, he found something strange tucked deep in the databanks of one of the human-lead outer defense beacons. An entire drive unit fried at the surface, glowing dim with one active core process. No beacon ID, no registration, just a lock. Locked files, locked heat signatures, even locked memories attached to the interface. But Elan felt it. Saw it, the black circle. Even he paused. He brought it back to his ship, powered it on within a sealed bay, and waited. At first, nothing happened. Then a slow boot code scrolled across the screen lines that made no sense. They weren't coordinates. Not entirely. A pattern. A pulse. A message, but for what? As he stared, the screen showed only a sentence, ***, watch who speaks when we are silent. ***, Elan sat still for a long moment, suddenly aware of the slow hum building in the background. He didn't hear it. He felt it in his bones. Something was waking, across the stars. The idea was beginning to form inside people's minds. What if this isn't retaliation at all? What if it's a test? Because here's what no one wanted to admit. Humanity had always held back in every conflict. Even when humans lost, they never gave everything. They adapted, absorbed, suffered, but rarely unleashed their full weight. Analysts chalked it up to ethics. Others to instability or overcomplication. But fear had started creeping into the minds of alien strategists. What if they just hadn't wanted to show everyone what they could really do? Dr. Senor Alveth, field historian and cultural analyst from the Bexary Commonwealth, reviewed human war doctrines in a quiet academic lab far from the front lines. Known as one of the few neutral scholars who specialized in human behavior, she had access to files most governments ignored. But none of it made sense now. Human actions had never mattered more, but their silence meant fewer answers than ever. She scanned transcripts of Earth's last public transmissions, analyzing body language, facial tightness, sentence patterns. The humans had known they were pulling back, she realized. They didn't just go quiet, it had always been part of their plan. This entire time, behind the noise and negotiations and open trade and cultural exchange, humanity had been building more than ships and cities. They had been building options, and now they were choosing what? She murmured to herself, staring at a still frame of a human official from 2 cycles ago. A stern man with a calm expression. Not smiling. Not angry. Just watching. Then she saw something in the footage no one had paid attention to. Everyone had been focused on what he was saying at the press conference, but no one had noticed the pin, a small, dark circle. At the time, it looked like fashion. Now, it was everywhere. What scared her most was the sheer restraint. Human fleets hadn't invaded. Orbital strikes hadn't begun. They hadn't targeted trading routes or broadcast demands. They had every reason to move, and instead, they were letting the galaxy squirm. In silence, more systems began reporting sightings of the quiet armada. Always at the edges. Always just visible enough to be noticed, then gone. Not randomly drifting. They moved with purpose, forming wall-like shapes along high-threat borders, eclipsing trade zones and vanishing into deep space where only the most classified relay stations existed. The ships bore no names, but the design was unmistakable. Earth signature hull, solid, practical, covered in lightweight armor designed not for show. But survival. Coordinated, unified, still not a word. Sector of rogue fleets attempted to intercept one squadron near the Serenthi Drift, hoping to bait a response. The human ships outmaneuvered them without firing a shot, jammed their systems mid-drift, and vanished, leaving their enemies dead in space. No destruction. No trophies. Just humiliation, inside a secure war room aboard an aging Earth command. Stationed somewhere within the Nabari Vela, different strategy was developing. The people sitting inside this room didn't wear medals or uniforms. They weren't admirals or generals, not in the traditional sense. They were historians, archivists, strategic anthropologists, human minds trained to piece together patterns. Across centuries, they had seen this before in Earth's history, every time a great civilization underestimated what humans could live through. They misjudged what would happen when those humans stopped showing grace. One gray-haired advisor pointed to a glowing thread map, lines connecting dozens of systems human ships had recently been spotted in. On their own, the paths looked random. In full scale, something larger was forming, a shape, a shield, slowly surrounding the core of all human trade space. "They're drawing something," she said quietly. "But who's the message for?" No one replied because they all knew everyone. The message was for everyone else, every empire that thought silence was. Surrender. Every government that thought complicity would go unnoticed. Every opportunist who had used human diplomacy as a shield. While waiting for a moment to strike, Earth wasn't sending a message. They were the message, and it was written in silence. The kind that comes right before history is torn down. Somewhere in deep space beyond known maps, a final ship detached from a long-hidden station, black hull. No markings. No noise. It had no escort, but behind it, following from a distance like a shadow through smoke, nearly 100 ships adjusted course, all human. All quiet, and all waiting. Waiting for the signal. Not a speech. Not a broadcast. Just a single pulse. The quiet armada had drawn their lines. Now they waited to see who would cross them first. Asterisk. The day the stars held still, it wasn't because of gravity or physics or even war, it was fear. Fear shared across broadcast waves, buried between words spoken in diplomatic chambers, hiding in the breath held by empire after empire. Rumors had stretched thin and snapped. Whispers had turned into clenched orders. And now, everyone waited beneath a sky being reshaped by silent motion. Motion that came from one place only. Humanity. Across the trade belt near the Zelvar Gate network, civilian traffic had slowed to near total stoppage. Stations that once ran 1,000 voice channels per second now sat quiet, with red lights blinking slowly in hallways usually filled with laughter, deals, and music. Even the security guards spoke in hushed tones, glancing up at the screens that showed jumps in and out of nearby systems. Nothing moved without being noticed anymore, especially not the black-hulled ships that had begun to ghost into fields nearby, never firing, never demanding, only present. Their shadows were enough. At first, the galaxy had treated them like phantoms. But these ships weren't illusions. They disrupted systems. They hovered at key points. A dozen appeared over the water planet Ethari, just 3 days after its leaders announced a new trade route designed to undercut long-standing human cost parameters. Another 11 silently aligned themselves above the Nyril, forged only hours after the High Council their declared human fleets, incapable of defending their influence. No threats were made. No weapons were drawn. And still, everything inside those star systems froze in place. The quiet armada no longer had to fight to be feared. They just had to arrive. Far above the core ring of Earth, locked within orbit in a black zone where feeds were scrubbed and satellites redirected. A station hung like a shadow among stars. It was not a secret, not exactly. People had heard rumors. They called it the Null Crown, a command post made from the core of an old ruined something left behind after the first wave of humanity pushed into deep space 100 years earlier. It was rebuilt in secret, expanded in silence. Even Earth's current leaders denied its existence. Inside one of its cavernous control rooms, a man stood before a three-dimensional map displaying each of the Armada's positions. There spread a quiet choke across the known systems. People called him strategist now, though he'd once led task forces beneath Earth's defense network before resigning after the Kepler incident. His record was spotless. Indeed, parts of it had been erased to make room for deeper truths. He wore no suit, no armor, just dark clothing, quiet eyes, and voice only used when necessary. At the center of the control table sat a pulse, Relic, a sensory device capable of detecting emotion waveforms across military-grade layers. It glowed faintly red. The strategist reached out and tapped the rim once. A single word formed in the air above it, asterisk, asterisk, instability. Asterisk, asterisk, it meant the trigger conditions were getting close. He didn't speak to the others monitoring the board. Their work was precise, silent. They knew the mission. Every fleet, every ship, every drone placed in position had meaning beyond. The moves most leaders could guess. This was not a war of conquest. It was a test. Humanity had made itself loud for as long as other species could remember. Words were dangerous, but calculated silence could bring down empires. That was the lesson they were now teaching without a single shot fired. Elsewhere, under the veil of a moon long stripped of atmosphere, Ilan sat in the dark beside his patchwork shuttle. The drive core he'd retrieved still humming with low, rhythmic loops. He hadn't meant to get involved, not really. He was a scavenger, just trying to survive between forgotten systems. But this relic, whatever it was, it had ideas of its own. All around him, symbols began to shift. How, he didn't know. The black circle kept appearing in different forms, layering itself atop forgotten code, reordering data blocks from human databases that had once been locked behind military-grade restrictions. He wasn't a tech genius, but even he recognized that something inside the relic was teaching itself him. It had absorbed his systems, his neural scans, his thoughts. And it wasn't done yet. A faint phrase kept repeating every few hours, played only on a private audio line that bypassed even his ship's controls. Asterisk, asterisk, you will witness. Asterisk, asterisk, he didn't know what he was supposed to see. But part of him no longer wanted to. Not fully. Because the deeper he stared into the relic's core, the more it pushed fragments of memory into his thoughts, memories that weren't his. Battlefields of ash. Cities silenced before bombs fell. Fleets retreating under desperation while deals were made around boardroom tables that guaranteed their doom. And the faces, 100 faces of humans offering peace right up until peace was refused. Then, darkness. The relic was showing him Earth's choice. The reason for the silence. Not anger. Not vengeance. Something older. Justice. And not the galaxy's version. Theirs. At the edge of this unraveling galactic standoff, a fleet belonging to the Zoran Empire prepared to launch a disruption probe inside the Vactari expanse, a dead space near 3 overlapping borderlines. The expanse had been unclaimed for cycles, but recent sightings of quiet armada vessels had made it a hot point of attention. The Zoran captain believed he could provoke a human response, record it, analyze it, use the information to predict patterns. That was the plan. But the humans already knew, 6 hours before the probe launched. Interference signals began to pulse through the Zoran bridge, sensors slow, methodical, layered in algorithms so old they hadn't been used since the days of Earth's expansion. No shields went up. No offense followed. Instead, every time a Zoran officer accessed the navigation panel, the system reset, not bugged, reset. Back to factory code. Erasing any control the ship's crew had over star maps, propulsion, even internal security. Then the lights shut off. Cold silence pressed in. Finally, one Zoran officer, young and terrified, swore she saw a human ship slide alongside them in the dark. Lights off, weapons dormant. Just watching. No one confirmed it. And that was the point. Across 5 sectors, humanity's silence grew heavier. Governments issued statements promising security. Councils met in emergency. Fleet officers debated, waiting for orders that never came. Some pushed for a preemptive move. Others begged for one more chance to talk to Earth, but the line was still dead. Deep inside the Null Crown, the strategist stood alone in a steel chamber where atmosphere was kept low to prevent data corruption. Only one screen glowed there. It displayed Ilan's relic. It had activated. The strategist saw the signal. Read its progress. And nodded. They single quotes. Waited long enough. All the simulations, all the warnings, all the attempts to avoid this moment, they were done. Now came the split. The line had held and the galaxy had chosen. The Armada no longer needed authorization to act, all that was left. Was the pulse? Triggers were armed across half a dozen passage points, ships aligned with planetary drift to occupy tactically perfect lines. Signals were ready to be sent but still weren't sent. Humanity stood at the edge of a decision they'd given others countless chances to prevent, and at the heart of it all, a scavenger, a strategist, hundreds of captains, and a billion silent watchers waited for the final decision. Still not a single word, just breath held across stars. And the sense that when the silence finally ends, it won't sound like words. It will sound like judgment. The stars never made a sound, but when the silence finally broke, entire systems stopped moving. It began not with an attack, not with a signal blast or blinking emergency contacts, but with music. A single song, soft, elegant, old, human across dozens of sectors. Every communications array once touched or used by Earth lit up, overridden not by force but by understanding. No encryption was broken because the humans had built the systems in the first place. They knew where every weak point rested. The music echoed through diplomatic channels, military frequencies, even civilian ports. It changed nothing about the systems, just reminded everyone listening, who had once connected at all. The song played for 2 minutes and 47 seconds, then came the voice. One voice. Calm and clean, without name or title. Not rage, not grief, not gloating. Just clarity. To those who listened during our silence, thank you. That was all. The rest of the message never came. Because it didn't need to. By the time the quiet armada repositioned, the work had been done. The fleets had drawn their line, caused no death, spilled no blood since their retreat. And yet, the galaxy had been reshaped by them without a single war campaign. People had changed their policies, reconsidered alliances, activated hidden treaties, and re-established codes of conduct not under threat of invasion, but in fear of why they had ever let things fall this far. The strategist stood once again in the command core beneath the null crown, staring at the newly stabilized resonance field. Data bloomed around him, every intercepted signal, every fleet redirected, every leader who now sent direct messages back to Earth asking not for punishment, but for dialogue. For some, it had taken only weeks. For others, years. But the meaning had landed. No empire had responded with missiles. None had dared shout back when Earth refused to speak, because in that silence, they had all seen themselves across far sectors. Independent outposts that had shut down when relations collapsed were reopening. Old colonies, long considered abandoned, were finding renewed supply routes. Not because humans marched in with banners or guns, but because the systems that humans had quietly designed to support these places were reactivating. One by one, back on the edge of the Varro's moon, Elon watched his terminal go still for the first time in weeks. The relic dimmed quietly, no longer pulsing with pressure. The black circle remained on the display screen, but the shift was clear. It was no longer a warning. It was a seal. And it meant the message had been delivered. He exhaled slowly and leaned back, head against the wall of his cramped cabin, letting his thoughts catch up with everything that had happened. The memory flashes stopped. The sensation of borrowed weight lifted. And for the first time since finding the core, he understood he wasn't selected. He wasn't a tool. He had simply been there to listen, to feel. To witness. And now he had. People like Elon would tell stories in the years to come about what it was like when humanity went quiet on purpose. How empires that once mocked Earth folded in on themselves, trying to guess the next move. How no one could understand how powerful it was when one species known for noise and kindness and debate chose instead to go. Still. The historians later called it the long silence, a galactic moment when humanity changed the power structure of the galaxy without ever engaging a single fleet in open battle, a lesson written not in tactics but restraint on Varellan Prime. Peace documents were updated. On Bexary stations, academic traffic shot up, philosophers arguing over the ethics of silence as strategy, even in rogue sectors. Pirate bands began using human standards of interaction not out of loyalty, but out of caution. because now everyone had seen what Earth looked like when it spoke softly and what it looked like when it didn't speak at all, the quiet. Armada began withdrawing, not retreating, just receding, like the tide returning to an ocean that had studied the shore too long. No victory houses were built, no speeches held. The ships never celebrated, never even paused. They simply moved back toward their orbits, their stations, their jump gates, and vanished into human-controlled space once more. In the end, only a few artifacts remained, left behind not as threats, but reminders, one in a derelict listening station on the edge of Algarai. Space had a display that simply read, ***, we stood still. You moved. ***, to the rest of the galaxy. The story would never be one of war. It would be remembered as a calibration. The moment when humanity recalibrated how they wanted to exist among the stars, not through conquest or compliance, but through consequence. And in that stillness, they showed something no civilization had expected: patience. More dangerous than rage, the message had never been about isolation. It had been about standards. From that point forward, new treaties would be written with active clauses about silence protocol. Commanders across the galaxy would teach cadets about the quiet armada and the psychology of withdrawal. Diplomats would be trained to read the signs of a people preparing not to argue, but to stop arguing, because stopping meant a decision had already been made, and few would ever want to face a second. Silence. On Earth. The sun still rose, the cities of New Europe, the coastal towers of Pacific Reach, the rebuilt eco-domes of Sao Nova life went on as if nothing had changed. Children played. Artists painted. Farmers grew. Scientists dreamed. Citizens found peace in the stillness. They had earned. Humanity hadn't withdrawn out of defeat. They had simply taken a breath. When no one else would, the strategist, now unnamed and unneeded in the way he had been, left the null crown and returned to the green zone's real soil. Real trees and wind that carried pollen rather than plasma. He walked without guards, without staff. Just a man among people who had trusted that the weight they put down when they went silent had been picked up by all the others who were finally willing to bear it. Back on his dusty station, Ilan marked an old travel node for deletion. He had no reason to scavenge anymore. Some part of him wanted to go back to Earth. He hadn't been there since he was a boy. Maybe he would find his father's old cabin outside the dunes near Marswell Ridge, or maybe he'd just walk until the sky stopped feeling so heavy. But wherever he went, he would carry that moment with him, the moment the stars held their breath, and humanity chose not to break them. In the end, the quiet armada had revealed the deeper truth, not just about human resolve, but about the galaxy itself. That behind the politics and profit, when rule replaced cooperation and greed was louder than reason, the only thing needed to shatter arrogance was silence. It was never about fear. It was about reminding everyone who had ears to hear that humanity had given the galaxy every chance, and that sometimes the most human act of all is simply walking away and being remembered for what you didn't say instead of what you could have.